Greetings and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Exchange 2013 Disaster Recovery. In the previous lesson, we discussed Exchange high availability. Now, high availability, although awesome, may not provide protection against every possible failure or disaster. If you have it set up properly, it can provide that type of protection, but more often than not, it's an expensive alternative to disaster recovery. Now, it's true, with high availability, you never have to restore Exchange because you have the ability to either fail over or switch over to servers that are already up and running. But again, that costs money, and so sometimes it comes down to expense. And so the cheaper solution is to take a backup. So you need to have a data protection plan for disaster recovery of your Exchange data. That plan may be a complete high availability plan. It may be a mixture of high availability mixed in with disaster recovery, like a backup solution, or it might include a continuous data protection solution. Obviously, we have a great deal to discuss, so let's get started. From the moment you have Exchange up and running and mail flowing in and out of your organization, the most important subject that should be in your mind is data protection planning. To plan properly for every sort of problem requires complex planning that can only begin with a review of possible options. Solutions and terminology that need to be considered with a data protection plan include things like backup technology support, which relates to Windows Server Backup. That's the built-in backup solution in Server 2008 and Server 2012. We'll talk about System Center Data Protection Manager, which is a continuous data protection solution, so we'll talk about that. We'll discuss server recovery, recovery databases, database portability, and dial tone portability, or dial tone recovery. Let's start with a discussion of built-in backup technology support. So personally, I've been working with Exchange for roughly 15 years. And with early versions of Exchange, the moment you installed it on a server, the built-in backup tool, at the time it was NT Backup and we were installing on NT servers, it was Exchange 5.5. Well, the backup tool on that server would automatically be able to back up your Exchange databases. These were called Extensible Storage Engine Streaming Backups, and the solution was pretty limited in many ways. Free backup solutions from Microsoft have always been limited, so this wasn't a surprise to us, but it did get the job done. Now, something has changed over the years, and in fact for a little while we were not even able to back up Exchange when installing Exchange 2007 on a server running Server 2008. But ultimately, with Exchange 2010 and now with Exchange 2013, ESE streaming backups, these are no longer supported, but Volume Shadow Copy Service, or VSS backups, these are supported, and it's actually a faster solution. Exchange 2007 and 2010 included two VSS writers. So these writers are essential in order to actually get the backup of the Exchange data. With 2007 and 2010, one writer was in the Microsoft Exchange Information Store, and the other was in the Microsoft Exchange Replication Service. So one of the VSS writer changes in 2013 is that now all of the functionality is within the Microsoft Exchange Replication Service. The actual writer is called the Microsoft Exchange Writer, and basically it's used by Exchange-aware VSS-based applications to back up both active and passive database copies. And then, of course, not just back up, but also restore those database copies. So Windows Server Backup is an Exchange-aware VSS-based application, and so it can back up Exchange. However, it's not the be-all and end-all of backup recovery solutions. Let's talk about it for a moment. Exchange 2013 has a VSS plugin that allows it to work with Windows Server Backup and get a VSS-based backup. The new plugin is called WSBExchange.exe, and it is installed by default, so it's not something that you have to install or worry about. It's already there. You'll see in a moment that Windows Server Backup is not there by default. You actually have to enable this feature on the Exchange Mailbox server in order to work with it and use the plugin, but the plugin itself is actually there. Now, these backups are at the volume level. So if you're thinking, well, I'm just going to take a backup of this mailbox, or you know what, I'm just going to back up this one message. No, no, no. There are no backups of that sort. This is a volume level backup. You have to back up the entire volume. However, you can restore only the Exchange data. Now, granted, the volume you're backing up, it may actually have only the Exchange data anyway. And so depending on how you have your Exchange set up, if you have volumes that contain just your databases and so forth, then it's pretty much the same thing. But the backup technically is not backing up your databases, it's not backing up your mailboxes, the backup is for the entire volume. During the restoration, however, you are able to signify the application being Exchange, and you're able to say we only want to restore the Exchange data. And then you can restore to the original location, or you can restore that data to an alternate location. What you cannot do is restore directly to a recovery database. Now, we haven't discussed recovery databases thus far, but this is actually a limitation that's a bit goofy, because without being able to restore directly to a recovery database, you have to create this recovery database, you have to restore the data to an alternate location, and then you have to take the restored data and move it over to the location of the recovery database data, and then you can juggle the data in such a way so that you can get that data back where it belongs. So the restore process is pretty convoluted when it comes to Windows Server Backup. Does it work? Yes, it does. But it's not as easy as pointing to a database, a mailbox, a message, and saying, yes, restore this, and boom, it just works. It doesn't quite work like that at all. It's a lot of extra work, but again, it's a free solution built right in. So when you want something that's a little more robust, a little more granular in terms of the control and ability and flexibility, you're looking really at a third-party solution. The other important point about Windows Server Backups is that only a full backup scan can be taken. So there are no adjustments in terms of incremental, differential, and so forth. It's a full backup scan. Let's jump over to our Exchange server. Let's enable Windows Server Backup. Let's take a volume level backup of our Exchange environment, and then we'll work through the restore process, and you'll get a chance to see what we mean by being able to restore only the Exchange data. Alright, so here we are on our Exchange server, and the first thing we need to do is enable the Windows Server Backup feature, which is something that we would do through Server Manager. So in this case, we're working with Server 2012. The same is true of Windows Server 2008 R2. You have to install the Windows Server Backup feature. So we do that through Server Manager. So from here, we can click Add Roles and Features. And we click Next. We're going to do a role-based or feature-based installation and click Next. The server that we're going to install this on is POS EX2K13.SpyTech Prime. And of course, if we wanted to back up our secondary server as well, we can do that. But we're going to stick with the primary server here. We click Next. The role is not our concern. We're not actually going to be installing any additional roles. If we click Next, we go to Features, and if we look down at the bottom, we can see here Windows Server Backup. So we select that checkbox there and click Next. And then here we see Windows Server Backup is the confirmation piece here. And so it says to install the following roles, it says click Install. We click Install. Certain roles or features may require that you restart the server. So you saw that there was a checkbox there that we could have it restart the server automatically for us. In this case, we're not worried about that. And as you can see, the installation succeeded, so we click Close. So from here, if we go to the Start screen, if we type in Windows Server Backup, you can see it brings it up here now. We can click to start this off. We could have started this off before and taken a look here, and it would have pretty much just told us that it won't work unless we actually install it. So now that we have the feature installed, it will work. But either way, you could have started this up and taken a look at the actual application. It just simply wouldn't have worked. We click Local Backup. And you can see that being that we just installed the feature, there should be no activity here. We have no activity. There is no last backup, next backup. We have nothing scheduled, although we could schedule backups. And so this is the value of a backup solution, is that we can do this on a schedule so that we don't even have to think about it. For now, what we're going to do, just to demonstrate the backup and recovery features here, we're going to do a one-time backup. So we click Backup once. And here we have different options. We're not doing a scheduled backup. We click Next. We're going to back up the full server, and that will give us a full backup of everything on the server, the system state and everything. We click Next. We can choose the type of storage for backup. So if we had a local drive connected in, we could use a local drive. We could do a DVD drive. In this case, we're going to do a remote shared folder, and click Next. The location here is a server called Camino. That's a server we're going to use for the backup. And the shared folder name is Exchange Server Backup. And for access control, notice we can choose Do Not Inherit or Inherit. This option makes the backup accessible to everybody who has access to the specified remote shared folder. We're going to leave the default setting and click Next. We need to provide credentials for the server. And so at this point, it's going to perform a backup of the entire system. Notice it's a VSS copy backup, and click Backup. And obviously, depending on the server and the amount of data and so forth, it may take a little while to do this type of backup, especially backing up to a remote server. Alright, and so we've completed the backup. We click Close. We see our backup. We see it's been successful. And now we're not going to go through with a full recovery. There's no point in that. We haven't had a problem with the Exchange server. We're not looking to demonstrate the recovery of it. We are not looking to perform a recovery database recovery at this point. Much of this lesson relates to understanding concepts so that important decisions can be made with regard to your data protection plan for Exchange 2013. But let's just take a look at this point about recovering Exchange itself. If we select the backup here and we click Recover, here it says, do we want to restore to this server or to another location? So we have that ability to restore to another location. At this point, we'll leave it as this server. We click Next. It asks us about which backup we want to restore. At this point, we only have the one, so we'll stick with that, and we click Next. Because we put our backup on another server, it's asking for credentials to access the backup on that server. Now, notice this. We can restore files and folders, volumes, applications, system state, and if we had backed up here Hyper-V, we can restore virtual machines, but we didn't back up Hyper-V. So we're looking at this option here, Applications. If we select Next, you can see that Exchange is an application that we can restore. So this is really helpful. We can click View Details. It tells us exactly what it's going to restore as far as on the Exchange server, the databases that were backed up. We have two databases on this server, and so it backed them up, and so we can restore those. If we click Next, we can restore it to the original location, or we can recover to another location. So we're not going to go forward. As we said, we're not going to do the recovery, but it was important to show you that Windows Server Backup, it does indeed work. We're not saying that it doesn't work. What we are saying is that Windows Server Backup has limitations. And as we'll discuss in a moment with recovery databases and so forth, these limitations, although they do allow us to recover the data, they may actually exceed the threshold where we decide, you know what, it's worth putting a little bit of money into this and getting a third-party solution, or going with Data Protection Manager, some other solution, and utilizing that as opposed to Windows Server Backup. So let's jump back over to our server and let's talk about these different solutions. Data Protection Manager with continuous data protection and other third-party solutions, and discuss what these solutions might be able to give us that exceeds what Windows Server Backup can do for us. So one of the alternative solutions to using Windows Server Backup is to use a continuous data protection solution like System Center Data Protection Manager. So what is a continuous data protection solution as opposed to the backup? Well, a backup takes a point-in-time backup of what you have at that moment. So you might set it up for an evening after folks go home, you get that backup, and then middle of the day if the server goes down, you can restore that backup. But you've obviously lost data. You've lost all of the data from the work that's gone on that morning. Now we say that data has been lost, but if you have been creative when it comes to your data protection plan, then you have your database separate from your transaction logs. You can restore the data from your backup. You can have those transaction logs play into the recovered database, and you should be pretty good as far as up to the minute, up to the second, whatever is the case depending on your environment and how much mail is moving back and forth there. So that's not necessarily a bad solution. Backing up and recovering is the way that we've done it for years. The negative there is that there's time lost, and there's effort that has to be put into recovering the lost data in order to then merge it together with either a dial tone recovery or some of the other options we're going to discuss in a moment. The difference with continuous data protection is, as the name suggests, it's making sure that you have a backup of the data as it's coming into your environment. So you have the ability to restore that data immediately. So it's a faster recovery solution than your typical backup solution that you would have with Windows Server Backup. But again, it comes at a price. Windows Server Backup is free. Data Protection Manager comes at a cost, and it will require some extra effort in terms of understanding how to work with it and how to utilize it. Now at the same time, it may be a solution that you're already using for the backup of your other servers. You may have file servers, you may have Active Directory servers, you might utilize virtualization with Hyper-V, and so System Center has the ability to back up all of these different types of Microsoft servers. So assuming that you're a Microsoft shop and you have the need to back up not just Exchange, but all of these other solutions, then System Center Data Protection Manager might be the solution that you look to for your entire organization. Now, beyond that, there are other solutions, third-party solutions, to consider. There's Dell App-Assure, there's Veeam Backup and Replication, there's Commvault Sympana, and the list just goes on and on and on. So it's important to consider these third-party solutions to see whether or not they meet your needs for the recovery process and for your data protection plan. Now you might say, well, wait a minute. Windows Server Backup is free and it works, so why would I go with another solution? And now you're thinking, oh, but okay, continuous data protection, that sounds interesting, so I can go with System Center Data Protection Manager. What does a third-party solution offer me that these others don't? Well, these third-party solutions, they do come at a price, but they offer flexibility that you just don't get with the built-in Windows Server Backup or even with Data Protection Manager. So that flexibility might be the ability to select a mailbox or even a mailbox message and click a restore button and boom, it goes right back into the user's mailbox. That's without having to set up a recovery database. That's without having to jump through hoops to restore data. So it might be that a third-party solution is worth the cost depending on the needs of your environment. Obviously, at this point, we're not going to go too much further with regard to System Center Data Protection Manager or other third-party solutions. In fact, let's go back a step and let's talk about some additional built-in features for data recovery and data protection and planning, starting at the server level. Did you know that most of the settings for an Exchange server are actually stored in Active Directory? You know, we put all of that information in, but Active Directory gets a copy of it, and so this is very helpful in the event you need to restore an entire server. So let's imagine that a server has gone down for whatever reason. Whether it's a client access server or a mailbox server, it doesn't really matter, because we're not really concerned, even with the mailbox server, we're not concerned with the restoration of the databases themselves. that would still require a Windows Server Backup Restore or a third-party or Data Protection Manager recovery. So we're not concerned with the data itself, we're simply concerned with recovering the server itself and the settings that are specific to the server. So to recover a lost server, you actually use the setup/m:"recover server switch. This switch will rebuild a server with the same name, and it uses all the Active Directory information about the Exchange environment. And this is all done through the command prompt. You need to remember, in order to make this work, you have to reset the computer account for the lost server. So that server is in Active Directory already, but you're going to reset the account. You're going to install a new server. That could be on the same hardware, or it could be a brand new box. You provide the same name on the new server, and then you join the new server to the domain. You install all the prerequisites just as if you're doing a brand new installation of an Exchange server, and then instead of just kicking off the setup and doing a straight install into your Exchange environment, you initiate a recovery by using the setup/m:"recover server switch. And this will perform the install of Exchange, and it will also reconnect it back with Active Directory and rebuild the server so that it's actually, or a clone of the server that existed prior to the failure. So server recovery is something that's built right into Exchange, and we appreciate that this is something that's not too difficult to do. We've also mentioned the term recovery database. Let's talk about what this is. So a recovery database, or RDB, is a special mailbox database that allows you to mount a restored database and extract data from it over to a production database. The benefit of the RDB is that you can restore a mailbox or individual mailbox items without upsetting the normal flow of your production databases, which are still mounted and working. Now, on the negative side, for those of you who love the GUI, you cannot create an RDB through the Exchange Admin Center, but rather you have to create an RDB through the Exchange Management Shell. If you're wondering why, well, so am I. We don't really know why they haven't just built this right into the Exchange Admin Center just yet, but either way, it's something you have to do through the EMS, and that's the way it is. Now, we look at this and we say, okay, so what can I do with this recovery database? Well, just as we were talking about third-party tools, everyone loves a point-and-click restore of a mail message, a mailbox, a database. But again, those are things that you have to pay for. Those are third-party tools that you have to pay for. Recovery databases are different from your standard mailbox databases. First of all, because as we just mentioned, they're created using the Exchange Management Shell. It's also important to note that a recovery database is unique in that mail cannot be sent to it. In fact, all of the client protocol access, like SMTP, POP, IMAP, this is all blocked to a recovery database. And users cannot connect to their mailboxes even if their mailboxes are recovered in a recovery database. It just doesn't work that way. For an end user to actually access the data that has been recovered in the recovery database, you actually have to merge that data into an existing database and into an existing mailbox. So, like I said earlier, it's a lot of hoops to jump through to restore data from Windows Server Backup through a recovery database. So, like I said earlier, it's actually a lot of different hoops to jump through if you need to restore data through Windows Server Backup to a recovery database. It's actually easier to just restore the data directly and recover it from Windows Server Backup than try to extract specific data, whether it's a database or a mailbox, because now you have to create the recovery database, restore the data to an alternative location, move that data into the recovery database, and then merge the recovery database with a dial tone recovery. So you can see how it can get very convoluted and messy as we go forward with trying to recover specific individual mailbox items or a specific database. Regarding the use of a recovery database, you can use this to recover data through either a same or alternate server dial tone recovery. And so we're going to discuss what a dial tone recovery is in a moment, but basically it allows your users to get up and running fast when it comes to being able to send and receive email. So imagine a situation where your primary organization responsibilities, the primary goal of, let's say, a specific department or your entire organization, revolves around email, which a lot of companies that is accurate. And it's not necessarily past email that's most important, but simply the ability to do business through email at any given moment in time. So if you need to get these people back up and running fast with email, and it doesn't matter if they have access to their older emails, then you can establish a dial tone recovery, which is basically getting them up and running with mailboxes fast, and then that gives you time to restore the data to a recovery database, and then ultimately whatever new emails that come in during the day, well, those will get merged with the legacy emails that they have in the recovery database. You can also do a mailbox recovery, so you can copy to a target folder, or you can merge the mailbox with another mailbox in order to recover an individual mailbox as opposed to recovering the entire database. And you can even use a recovery database to perform specific item recovery. Now, in the past, we've discussed things like deleted item recovery times, and so if a message is, let's say, deleted within that recovery time, let's say 14 days, or if you up it to 30 days, then they should be able to recover that message by themselves. They shouldn't require a restoration here. But let's say this email that they're looking for, that the individual is looking for, has been deleted or purged from a mailbox 60 days ago. And so there's no way that they can recover this through deleted item retention. In that case, if they warrant it, and let's say they're the vice president of whatever for the company, so they come to you and they say, look, I need this email back, well, you're going to need to now restore it. So you can use a recovery database for specific item recovery. Again, it involves jumping through quite a number of different hoops, but it is possible. So what is the difference between Windows Server Backup and features like the recovery database and a third-party solution? The difference is cost, so you're going to pay extra for the third-party solution, but you get the value and the benefit of a more robust solution, a more flexible solution, and basically a point-and-click solution. A solution where instead of worrying about how you're going to get this message back, you can do a quick discovery search, find the message, depending on the interface, click a little checkbox, and click Restore, and the message goes back where it belongs. For some, that's worth paying for. Now, to create a recovery database, you use the following Exchange Management Shell command. You use new-mailbox database-recovery, you put in the name, and you put in the server. So it's actually not very complicated to create the database itself. So the actual creation of the database itself is not all that complicated. Let's talk for a moment about database portability and dial tone recovery. Thanks to database portability, you can move and mount any database to any other mailbox server within your Exchange organization. Of course, it has to be the same organization. So this is really a great feature within Exchange, the ability to move these databases and mount them to any other server. And so it's because of this flexibility and portability of databases that's built right into Exchange that we have an easier time when it comes to restoring databases or even working with high availability. Now, we mentioned dial tone recovery and we gave a scenario of how that works. Just to review it, dial tone recovery allows you to get your people up and running fast with mailboxes, but their existing mailbox data is missing. Ultimately, you restore the mailbox data into the recovery database, and then you merge the two when you're ready. So ultimately, your people are up and running, they're able to send and receive emails, and then when the time is right, you can then merge the new and the old data together. It's a process. It's not something that just happens easily and automatically. It's something that's going to take a little bit of time. It's done through the Exchange Management Shell, so it's not as easy as a point-and-click restoration. Certainly not. But it does work, and dial tone recoveries will get your people up and running fast in order for them to send and receive email. So after hearing all of that information about the backup recovery solutions that are built in, third-party solutions, and so forth, what should we do with regard to Spytech Prime's data protection plan? Now, we know that currently we're utilizing high availability through a database availability group for in-house server protection. So we have two servers side by side. If one server goes down, it will fail over to the other server, and so we do have some data protection already in place. What else can we do here? Well, what we're going to do is increase our redundancy in-house. So we're going to establish a CAS array, we're going to utilize redundant load balancers, we're going to use router redundancy. Really, we're going to look at anything that could possibly fail and make sure that we utilize duplication or redundancy in every regard that we possibly can. And we're also going to utilize JBOD arrays for greater storage redundancy and fault tolerance. We're also going to expand this solution to include a secondary data center site, and we'll utilize 3 passive copies of the data for our active database. So we have 1 passive copy, we're going to add 2 additional passive copies. Now you might be thinking, well, what about a backup? We're talking about backup and recovery. Remember, the discussion is about disaster recovery, and we're talking about a data protection plan. So that doesn't necessarily mean you need to settle on a traditional backup recovery solution, nor do you need to go the route of a continuous data protection solution. You might utilize high availability to provide all of the data protection that you need. You simply need to design and deploy this in such a way that you get the greatest amount of data protection, or the level of data protection that your organization requires. Now, note, this may seem a bit bleeding edge in terms of leaving the crutch of a true backup, that traditional backup solution, but keep in mind, Spytech Prime is not the first to do this. Companies have been leaving behind traditional backups in favor of other solutions. Whether it's a continuous data protection solution, whether it's an online cloud-based solution, whether it's high availability, they're leaving behind the traditional backup route. But you might say, high availability, this provides availability of the data that exists. What if somebody did in fact delete a message 60 days ago? Without a backup, we would not be able to restore that information, and so this is not going to work. Well, in addition to these solutions, we're also going to utilize a third-party cloud-based solution for full archive and discovery of email. So pretty much any email that comes in or goes out of our organization will be retained by this third-party solution. And so in the event that a message is deleted 60 days ago and we now need to restore it, not a problem. We can perform discovery through this third-party cloud-based solution. So on the one hand, we get that missing piece with regard to discovery and restoration of messages that we would not have with a high availability solution. On the other hand, we also find ourselves matching regulatory compliance with regard to archiving our email for however long a period of time that's necessary. So again, third-party solutions, at times they're costly, but they can provide those extra little features and those extra, in this case, regulatory compliance features, as well as data protection features that you simply do not have provided for you within Exchange. So, a lot to think about, a lot to consider, and still much more to learn on this subject. But we hope you found this informative. We'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next lesson.